All right, here we are once again, the guy in the pew. I am that guy, Jeff Davis, and the purpose of this podcast is to turn a Sunday monologue into a weekday dialogue. And to help us do that is Michael Roundtree, lead pastor of DFW Wellspring. And we also have Stacy Bearfield running sound and tech support off camera.
She waved, but you can't see.
Yes. So, if you are interested in this conversation and you want to know where the sermon that this came from, you can find that on any podcast provider, YouTube, Facebook, anything like that. Just search Wellspring DFW, and you should find it there. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, so this week we are still talking. That sounds like the never-ending sermon
Just
series.
won't stop. It actually stopped this week. This is the last week. Redeeming my family tree.
That's right.
That's right.
Right.
So this week was the so-called Joseph story, but that was the thing about it, was that it wasn't really the Joseph story. Like everyone calls it the Joseph story, but it was really the redemption of Joseph's whole family. And so the message from beginning to end was really just different nuances of the point that God is not just committed to you, but to your whole family. And just what does that look like? And practically, how do we respond to that? And all the kind of questions that flow out of that as I walked through the Joseph story, and we saw his transformation as well as the transformation of his brothers. I think it's a highly relevant question in our society, because when you look at American society today versus where it was 10, 20, 50 years ago, the family unit is really disintegrating.
Yeah, for sure.
And God has a solution for that. And the solution isn't just like, well, send them to a therapist and hopefully they can get it figured out.
Yeah.
There's actually a solution in the Gospels. That's what we talked about.
That's good. One thing that always strikes me when we talk about biblical characters, especially Old Testament characters, but you can find this in the New Testament with the New Testament characters too. I say characters like I'm talking story. I mean, these are real people, and that's kind of my point, is that if you are, as a listener, if you are either a new Christian or you're somebody that is just searching and this, you're open to Christianity and Jesus and that sort of thing, I would encourage you to go and read the Old Testament and the New Testament and the stories and read them not in story form, but read them as think of these people as being real, because they were real people. Mm-hmm. And one thing that really did for me in my life was it brought to my attention how I think we get this idea in society and even in church that these biblical characters were chosen by God and they could almost do no wrong, like they had to be perfect, or they were perfect, or something along those lines. But when you read through the Bible, every one of these people had major character flaws. Mm-hmm. And they were far from perfect. And so that when I read that and I saw those things and really began to view these people as being real people, it made it easier for me to see myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and I kind of, when you were talking, I thought about Hebrews chapter 11, and you have these brief snippet of a one sentence biography of one biblical character after another, and then at the end it just hits a big list of them. But Abraham, Moses, and Jacob, Joseph, it just kind of walks through the different biblical characters, and it's fascinating because they were all commended for their faith. They were commended for their faith. They were commended for their faith. But then you see how much they did wrong.
Yeah.
And Hebrews 11, some people call it the Hall of Faith.
Yeah.
Because these are heroes, and yet they were so messed up. But it shows you, when I read that chapter, I get encouraged about how God views us.
Yeah.
That he's not just mulling over all of our deficits and the things wrong with us.
Yeah.
And when you look at Jesus in the Bible, like the people that he's really impressed with, he never says like, wow, you're super obedient and awesome. Like, I mean, he has some words for the Pharisees who are not obedient and awesome, or who think they are, but they're really not. But like, he's never impressed by anyone's obedience. What he's repeatedly impressed by is people's faith. You know, it says that he was amazed by their faith. Or in Matthew chapter 8, the centurion having faith for his servant, you know, that he can send the word and be healed. He was amazed at this person's faith and makes a remark on it. Yeah. But then, you know, like in Mark chapter 6 or Matthew 13, he's amazed the other way. He's amazed by their unbelief. Yeah. And I think sometimes for me, I get this idea like I'm going to impress God with my degree of commitment and devotion and sacrifice. Like, you know, if I tack on a few extra days on the fast, if I read my Bible for a little bit longer, if I memorize a few more verses, if I, you know, accomplish this great task for the kingdom, then God's going to be like, wow. I mean, but like, what really would make God say, wow? You're talking about the guy who made stars. Yeah, yeah. And it's amazing that there is something that will make him say, wow, and that's faith. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that whole thing is, it hits home for me. And I think that it'll hit home for everybody out there. I hope.
I hope. Yeah.
So you talked about Joseph and Judah being heroes in this story. Why did Joseph get the double blessing while Judah got the blessing of a ruler coming from him?
Okay. Yeah, so this is kind of like theologically a little bit of a confusing thing. Yeah. Because like when you read the story of the patriarchs, and it's just the story, it's like the beginnings of our faith. And so Abraham is the father of our faith, and he has this son. I mean, he has Isaac and he has Ishmael, the son of the flesh and the son of the promise. Clearly, the blessing goes to Isaac. Yeah. And not that Ishmael is unblessed, he's blessed in other ways, but the blessing of the covenant goes down through Isaac. And then that blessing goes down from Isaac, not to Esau, but to Jacob. Right. And then you get to Jacob having 12 sons. It's like, well, which one's it going to be? Yeah. And when you read the story, it's like, man, this blessing's all over Joseph. All the same things it said about his fathers, it says about him, like the Lord was with him. He suffered tremendously, but the Lord was with him, and the Lord was with him, and gave him this, and blessed him in this way, and promoted him in that way. And so you see the blessing going to Joseph. And for sure, Joseph did get the so-called double blessing, which is, the firstborn son would typically get a double blessing of inheritance. So Joseph did get that. He was the one and who got it. We don't know why, in the purposes of God, why it was Joseph and not somebody else, but he did. He got the double blessing. And so you can really see this when, I don't know if you guys are really familiar with this whole bit, but Joseph has like two of his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. They get included into the tribes of Israel. So there's no tribe of Joseph. It goes to two kids, Manasseh and Ephraim. And so Ephraim is the youngest of the two, and Jacob ends up passing the blessing down to Ephraim. Yeah. But he does bless both and include them in the tribes. The fact that it's two of them getting a blessing shows it's a double blessing, but yet it's Ephraim who gets it passed down through him. When you look, we're getting pretty theological here, but when you track Israel's history, what you see is the southern tribe, Judah, and then the northern tribe is often called Ephraim. Oh, and so a ruler really comes from both Judah and Ephraim. What's unique about Judah is that, so you kind of have like a dual thing going on where you're like, Joseph's getting the blessing on one hand. On the other hand, what happens with Judah is Judah starts out really bad. He strangely sleeps with his daughter-in-law, but he gets duped into it. I mean, it's just like this wild story. And not to mention, he does a few...
Once again, go read the story.
Yeah, once again, that's Genesis 38. And he doesn't do the honorable thing by his daughter-in-law in another situation. I mean, he marries Canaanites. That's really bad. So he starts out like not because of a racial thing, but because of a religious thing.
Right.
And so he starts off on a really bad foot. But as I mentioned on Sunday, there's a transformation in Judah where he goes from wanting to sell his brother into slavery and being the one who motions for that, to actually offering himself in slavery to save his brother. So you see a transformation in Judah. He's showing all kinds of like compassion for his father where he wasn't before. But then you have his other brothers. So like what happens is Genesis chapter 49, Jacob is there to bless his 12 sons. And as he's like going through, Reuben, here's what you get, and Levi and Simeon and Judah, and he goes down through the list and he blesses them all.
Yeah.
It's a unique scene in Genesis because usually the blessing is like Jacob just blessed one, just blessed, or Isaac just blessed Jacob. Anyway, so it's because it's the formation of a nation, and whenever he gets to Judah, he pronounces, "You'll be the one who has the ruler come out from you," and so son of Judah down the line is King David, and down the line is Jesus. And so what happened was, and the reason he passed over the first three brothers of Judah was that Reuben, the firstborn, sleeps with his father's concubine.
Nice.
Lots of fun stories. And this was not just a sexual thing, though. This was a usurping, trying to kind of steal the blessing, trying to like get ahead. By a little bit like Absalom sleeping with his father David's concubines in view of all Israel. It was a way of saying, I'm basically the king now. So Reuben was a usurper. And so Reuben lost that blessing that ultimately went to Judah to have a ruler come from him. And then you have Simeon and Levi. Terrible thing happens. Their sister is raped. And how do they respond? They murder a whole village.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so when Jacob is walking through the blessings, and this is just the fascinating thing, is like Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, the first three, like their blessing does not sound like a blessing. He's like, Reuben, you slept with my concubine, and you're kind of like uncontrolled water, and your life's going to be kind of weird and not that great. And then he goes through Simeon and Levi, kind of the same. Yes, thanks for and the Bible calls it a blessing. I think it's wonderful. And then it gets to Judah, and he gets this long, like, a ruler's coming from you and all this stuff. So anyway, that was a kind of long explanation. I apologize for that. But I think there's a big application for us here. And the application is, first of all, they were all the blessed people of God, the blessed nation of Israel, right? And yet, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi received, if you don't call it a curse, you could call it an anti-blessing. But they all received something that was not good in the midst of that. And what that shows is what we've been talking about all along, is that we can be the blessed people of God and still experience what you might call a curse or something like a curse. It's essentially a reaping what you've sowed. And those consequences still exist. You can't just say, well, I'm the blessed people of God, so these consequences don't exist in my life. And what you see in the case of Judah and Joseph is that righteous behavior is rewarded for all of our generations. But what we also see is that sinful behavior has a very long trajectory as well. And so the next time that we're choosing between sin and righteousness, we should consider, how will this affect my great-grandchildren? Because decisions are that big. Decisions are not just, they're not just like, well, I'll sin and I'll get forgiveness and probably nothing bad's going to happen. It's a big deal. But then the other thing is we can be redeemed from it like Judah. We can mess up, but we can still overcome it. And so anyway, I just think
it's kind of like the butterfly effect. If you
I don't know. What do you mean?
Oh, are you familiar with what that is?
Maybe not.
Okay. It's the theory that on one side of the earth, a butterfly can flutter its wings, and on the other side of the earth, it creates a storm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Law of unintended consequences.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, here's a big one in the Bible. This one's crazy. So you know the story of Esther, right?
yeah.
So, the Jewish people are about like it was like the pre-Holocaust Holocaust. I mean, they were about to
Yeah.
get exterminated, genocide, and Haman was the one in charge of their genocide. He was the Adolf Hitler of ancient Persia,
Wow.
and so all this is playing out. Esther is of course Jewish, but when it refers to Haman, the Adolf Hitler of his day, it refers to him as Haman the Agagite. Do you recognize the name?
No.
Agag? Okay. Agag goes
I
back.
have gagged before. I don't know.
Agag goes back to, I believe, 1 Samuel chapter 15. It's a story where Saul spares the best sheep and oxen and like the best of the Amalekites, including King Agag. Like he was supposed to slaughter them all, and he didn't. So basically, he didn't obey God.
Yeah.
Let some of the awesome Amalekites keep living, and this is in the context of war, and basically disobeys God, and so a descendant of one of those Amalekites comes back and threatens Holocaust on God's people.
Wow.
So I'm just saying,
Yeah.
our behaviors have a much longer trajectory than we realize.
Yeah.
And so, down to choices we're making on purity, choices that we're making on integrity,
Yeah.
the choices on just whatever the obedience is to the Lord that we're talking about. It's a big deal, but it's a big deal for bad, but it's also a big deal for good, as it was for Joseph and Judah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. And that whole thing of making, making those choices in the moment, because I can hear somebody, and talking back and saying, well, what about a white lie? I mean, come on, a little white lie. What's that going to hurt?
Great grandkids, they're gonna just be destroyed.
Yeah, right. But it's really about. It's not about the white lie. It's about the integrity issue, about willing to tell a white lie. Mm-hmm. That's really what the heart of the matter is. And so that's how I would rebut.
Yeah.
That person.
Yeah, and this is a New Testament principle too. You reap what you sow. You reap to the flesh, you sow from the flesh. You reap to the spirit, you sow life. And so this is this is just a big picture God concept. It's a reaping and sowing. It's a law of consequences and blessings, and it's the way the world works.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a law.
Yeah.
So you said that God is committed to your family.
Yeah.
And so that really is something that I had never really thought about. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, I know that's true. When you say that, oh yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But in deeper thought of that, it really kind of gives me comfort, at least, to know that it's like the example that you gave with Glen Campbell, not the singer.
Yeah.
Every time I hear his name, that's what I think about. Is the singer. Anyway, lots of y'all probably won't even get that reference, so I apologize.
Reminds you of your contemporary Frank Sinatra.
That's right. That's right.
I was trying to call you old.
I got that.
Because you're like 5 years older than me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But your example of Glen Campbell, his mother, and he just kept praying and asking for prayer for her to come to know Jesus, and
right.
And then just this past month, I think she said she was 84. Is that right?
She was old.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. So I mean, it's never too late, and what that spoke to me is that you can continue. God is committed to your family, and that's kind of the whole idea of this, of what you were talking about Sunday. Is that God wants you. It's not only about you. but it is about your family.
Yeah. There's like this tender balance of, on one side, we just talked about like how massive of an impact our behaviors have, right?
Yeah.
That we can
Yeah.
impact generations down
Yeah.
the line with our choices. Okay, so that's massive. But then on the other side, I mean, we have the grace side. And the grace side is like, okay, I want to be a committed dad to my family, but I have to remind myself God is committed to the success of my kids even more than I am. God loves my kids even more than I do.
Yeah.
And even in the ways that I do mess things up
Right.
as a parent, and I mentioned a story about, Hudson and my temper,
Yeah.
finding
yeah.
it's...
Actually, I have a question about that.
Okay,
but
sure.
I'll hold on to that.
All right. But I told a little story about just seeing some of my script kind of play out in him in a negative way, when he was like a toddler. But I have to remind myself, like, just like it was for Joseph, God used all the dysfunction to actually heal the dysfunction in the family.
Yeah.
He used all the messed up stuff. I mean, the perfect picture of that is in the cross, where, Acts chapter 4, God predestined that by the hands of sinful men, Herod, Pontius Pilate, that Jesus would be crucified. And does this mean that, like, God took the people's hands and was like, put the nail here? No.
Yeah.
But God somehow orchestrated in such a way, using human sin as his... Like, he's just not limited. He can use your righteousness as a tool, but he can use your sin as a tool too. And so I just have to remind myself, like, okay, like, my behavior matters a ton, but nothing matters as much as God's behavior.
Yeah. Yes.
My commitment matters a ton, but nothing matters as much as God's commitment.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll say, like, I don't use this phrase a ton, but I do consider us a gospel-centered church. And what that means is that our emphasis is not on man's words, man's works, but God's words, God's works. Not what I do for God, but what God has done and is doing and will do for us. And so it's a paradigm shift. One is very, like, religious, man-centered, and the other is like, hey, this is God-centered.
Yeah.
And so we want to, on one hand, value our behavior matters, but we want to know whose behavior matters more. And I just want to encourage our listeners today, just whenever you're listening, I don't know if it's morning or night, but just want to encourage our listeners that, your behavior, it definitely matters. It has a massive impact, but nothing matters more than the behavior of God in the past, present, and future,
Absolutely.
and devoting to your family.
That's something that I've prayed for a long time, and as I think about it, I don't know if it's a I think it's an okay prayer, but anyways, I'll just say what I pray.
Well, should I be the judge? We'll let God.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I pray, that he'll stand in the gap between my limitations and who I am as a father, or as a whatever I am, whatever I am in that moment. Even as an employee or whatever, you can pray in that respect as well, that he'll stand in the gap and fill that gap in. And that's really what you're talking about. And that's something that it's really about resting in him and abiding in him, and realizing that that you don't have to. You probably kind of can relate to this as far as wanting to parent your children perfectly.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, when I had first started having children, and actually before that, because I would always judge other people's.
Yeah, it's the easiest thing in the world to judge other parents before you've been a parent.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Then when your kid's throwing a fit in the supermarket, you're like, okay, I get it, God.
Yeah, right. Yes. And so, I had this high standard, this high ideal, and I still, obviously, standards are good, but to kill yourself and your children to meet the standards is not ideal. Is not the best thing to do. To have the standard, but then also to live with grace, with your children, and understand that obviously you're not going to meet that standard either sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
As the example.
In fact, I think just as we want to teach our children standards, we also want to teach them grace.
Right.
And so, the unique thing about God is he can show both fully and complete. Like in the cross, you have the perfect justice of God punishing his son on the cross, so sin gets punished.
Yeah.
You also have the perfect mercy of God spilling out like his blood on Calvary. So God is unique in that he can show mercy and justice at the same time.
Yeah.
I, as a parent, can't. It's kind of one or the other.
Yeah.
But every now and then, I like to throw a mercy curveball to my kids.
Yeah.
And
good.
so, when my daughter Anna, she took marker and colored all over a bed sheet once. And did I tell you this story?
I can't remember.
Anyway, she colored all over a bed sheet once, and I came up and I was like, I really wasn't that mad. I actually had to pretend I was more upset than I was. But anyway, so I was like, Anna, how could you do that? Why did you do that? And went through that, and I was like, I'll have to think about what your discipline is. And she was real worried about what it was going to be. And she came down, then it was it came Judgment Day.
Yeah.
Just 5 minutes later. and she's super terrified. And I was like, so here's what I'm going to do. Have you ever heard of grace before? And she's like, no. And I was like, well, I'm going to show you what grace is. And I said, so what you did was really naughty, wasn't it? Yes, it was. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take you to go get ice cream.
Yeah.
She's like,
what?
I was like, here's the deal. I don't want you to do that again.
Yeah.
But this is and I used it as a lesson for this is what God does for us.
That's good.
Now, if you do that every time, you'll have bad kids.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
if you do it every now and then, it's just a mercy curveball. You got to throw it in there every now and then.
That's good. I need to
But
maybe
make it an intentional instructional moment.
have more mercy curveballs. My kids would probably like that.
Now, you were saying earlier you had a question about the, Michael anger temper.
The shed.
deal
Yeah.
I
Well,
mentioned.
no. The question was, so the story. I'm going to kind of paraphrase the story. So the story was that you were upset with a leaf blower, I believe, that you were trying to get to work.
Terribly, terribly uncompliant
Yes.
leaf blower.
And so you threw a piece of it across the yard or whatever, and it hit the shed door.
That had a
full-length mirror
on
in
it.
it. So
Which
when
shattered.
you said that, I thought, why in the world do you have a full-length mirror in your shed? What is going on in your shed?
Sometimes you just got to see how you look in the shed.
Doing your hard work?
Look at me.
Hey.
Yeah. I was expecting a deep theological question. I was going to go on another 10-minute long explanation of 15 chapters of Genesis.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I bought the house and it had a full-length mirror on the shed. So you're going to have to ask the previous owner, who, by the way, was a drug user, and that's probably he was on crack when he put that up. I think it's probably the case. We only found out he was a drug user from the neighbors who were like, there were always cops here.
Oh, wow.
Anyway,
Awesome.
Yeah.
We got home, and we were talking about it, and I said, hey, by the way, did you think it was weird that he had a mirror in his shed? And Valerie said, yeah, I did.
It's kind of strange. Yeah. That's deep, dude.
Sorry.
Deep. That's important for our listeners.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What's your favorite color? Just kidding. All right.
Yeah.
Now let's proceed.
So you also said that no family is functional without forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that when you said that, I thought, well, yeah, I mean, that's almost like nobody is functional in any situation without forgiveness, or any relationship, I should say,
Right.
without forgiveness, because it's inevitable that we're going to offend the other person, or we're going to hurt the other person, or we're going to do something.
Right.
I mean, people are goofy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's true. But I think all of us, we can, kind of like when I introduced it, I told a story of somebody who had like a very deeply dysfunctional family,
Yeah.
but expanded on it and just said, hey, it's also more than that. It's any family that's not like functioning to the fullness and blessing that God intends. And nobody has a perfect family, like you said, because they're all made up of imperfect people, and there's going to be an offense somewhere. And I think the example that like stuck out to me biblically was just the story of Jacob, how like after all the transformation, all the experience, and all the divine encounters and all the blessings he's had throughout his life, he's been so transformed. He's such a different person, and yet he's still showing favoritism toward the youngest son. First it was Joseph, then it was Benjamin.
Yeah.
And like the brothers, they go from like, I want to like kill my brother or sell him into slavery because he's the favorite, to I want to save his life even though he's the favorite.
Yeah.
And so they're able to overlook like this just kind of flaw in Jacob's character. And I just think there's some times when it's just like Uncle Joe's going to be the way Uncle Joe is.
Yeah.
He's just going to say, like, he's going to be extremely socially awkward and sometimes rude,
Yeah.
Now, and again, that's not an excuse. It's not like we should subject ourselves to abuse. But there's just the reality that there's going to be that. Try to plan a Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Try to plan a vacation. Someone's going to get someone's toes stepped on. So you got to forgive.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I love that because it plays such a huge role. I know that there are probably people out there that are listening that have been hurt deeply. Either by a family member or by somebody else, but a lot of times it's family,
right?
And they don't get the connection between forgiveness and how it helps them. It's actually really for them,
right?
I mean, you're releasing that person, but it's not for necessarily that person's sake. It's really for your sake,
right?
And so. The thing that I've learned and grown in is that in and of itself, and when we take offense and we receive, so that person hurts us, and then we carry that with us,
right?
We're not only hurting ourselves in that way because we're hindering ourselves from growing beyond that, because we kind of stay stuck in that pain in that wound, but we also rob ourselves of the growth. So it is you're hurting yourself because you're keeping yourself back,
like in multiple ways. Yeah.
Right. So it's like you're holding yourself back and you're not letting yourself go forward.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And
totally
so
agree.
it just that whole forgiveness is so huge that
yeah. Well, and I think that like in a family, what happens is, there can often be like, and I've just counseled with many people throughout the years, there's typically like, it's almost like everyone could get along if it wasn't for this family member.
Yeah.
Like this one who's got like just, maybe it is the mother-in-law who's passive aggressive. Let's say that you got your little baby crawling around on the floor. Grandma, aka mother-in-law, is helping out. Like, wow, so you use cloth diapers? Or maybe more passive aggressive than that. Like, oh, those cloth diapers must really rub you raw. And you just like, and your wife's all like fuming over it, and then you're caught in the middle. Like, these dynamics are so common, and there's always one person. Sure. There's always one.
Yeah.
And whether it be an immediate family or extended family, that makes gatherings harder. And so there's always a Jacob in the family, and you got to learn to get over it. And if you look at this story, if the brothers, like, we make so much of Joseph's forgiveness, and rightly so, toward his brothers. But if the brothers are not willing to overlook Jacob's favoritism, then this reconciliation doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So if we want peace and reconciliation, there is a degree where, we kind of do have to suck it up and get over it and just accept sometimes people are the way they are.
Yeah. It'll get better through time as you continue to release, because sometimes those things are harder to, if it's a big offense, it's hard to just say, "Oh, I forgive. You're good."
Right.
No big deal.
And
But-
I certainly recommend making an open conversation. Like, like let's say I'm going to put myself in there. Like, my mother-in-law has never done this. I've never had this situation. It's totally fictional, for the record. But, hey, Mom, whenever you commented on my kids' diapers, we also don't use cloth. Whenever you comment on my kids' diapers that way, like, you were clearly trying to make a direct statement to my wife that we use the wrong kind of diapers and that we're raising our kids wrong. If you have an issue with the way we're raising our kids, I prefer you talk to me, not her. So that's me, the husband, trying to be the protector.
Right.
So talk to me and talk to me directly, because we don't deal with that. That's not how we're going to operate.
Yeah.
So now what happens? Either she responds, or maybe she just keeps doing it.
Right.
And if she keeps doing it, then I probably do, manage how much that interaction is going to occur.
Right.
I make sure that if she's like abusive with it, then no, it's not going to happen.
Or you just don't ever let her see the diapers.
Yeah, I mean,
keep closing the banners.
right. When I say it's not going to happen, like every situation's different.
Right.
You have to manage it. But first priority would be protect my wife.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I gotta forgive.
Yeah.
You gotta forgive,
Yeah.
and you try to direct confrontly and to forgive and to get over it, and often peace will just come through that.
Sure.
And usually passive aggressive people have never been addressed directly, like they're terrified of it. They're like,
Right.
oh.
And that's
direct
why-
conflict. I don't
Right.
like homie, don't play that.
Yeah, that's good.
Homie, don't play that. That was 80s.
Yes.
Kid and play.
That is a more up-to-date reference than Glen Campbell.
That is, yes.
Just slightly.
Slightly. Now, Stacy, when were you born, Stacy? 93.
93.
You don't know who Kid and Play is, do you?
No, that's not Can Play. That's In Living Color.
Was it?
Homie, don't play that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of the Wayans brothers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wayans. You probably know the Wayans. They stuck around.
Okay, good.
They're still doing stuff. All right.
Anyway.
Yeah, speaking of dysfunctional families.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's. Yeah.
Actually, that actually kind of worked. Wayans brothers. I get it. Nah,
Yeah.
that was an accident.
So, you talked about pain and how that is a catalyst for transformation.
Yeah.
And so how does that work? And then how can we be a part of that, like cooperate in that transformation?
Okay. So it's, not everybody who suffers gets better for it, right?
Right.
But some people suffer and they become much better people for it. They're
Yeah.
more humble and more considerate toward others, etc. So how do we have the good effect? How, as they say, how do we get better instead of bitter as a result of suffering? So to just think about it in the context of this story, what I identify in my reading of the story as the turning point for Joseph's brothers, it was their confession of sin. Starting with Judah, when he sleeps with the daughter-in-law who he thinks is a prostitute, really weird story. Go back and read it, Genesis 38. Anyway, I just told people of all passages, go read that one.
Yeah.
But, the whole Bible's good. Anyway, gosh, I just lost it. Where was I going with that?
The pain and the transformation.
Yeah, so the pain. So toward the end of that story, he confesses, recognizes, I've sinned. In fact, says, I'm the greater sinner here. And so he confesses. And then later, when you see in the story of the brothers, it's not like I confess I'm a sinner kind of confession. It's more of a humble acknowledgement and fear of the Lord you see in the story. Whereas before they had no fear of God. Like, we can kill our brother, no problem. Yeah. But here they're saying when Joseph is being kind of harsh with them, he's kind of testing them and like, can I trust these guys kind of deal. They don't recognize him. And so they're starting to freak out because they think our literal life is on the line.
Yeah.
And so they start speaking to each other in the Hebrew language and saying like, we never should have sold him into slavery. This is, we're getting our payback.
Yeah.
What they're showing is a fear of the Lord. And what they're showing is a consciousness for the first time that what they did and the way they treated their brother was wrong. And so and so I would say that when it comes to pain, there's a humbling ourselves.
That's
And
good.
there's a saying, just saying to ourselves, like, Lord, what are you teaching me through this?
Yeah.
Endure all hardship is discipline. All hardship has a lesson. Lord, what are you teaching me through this? And if there's sin to confess, because sometimes suffering is a direct cause of like sin, that was the case for them, then there does need to be confession. There does need to be a coming into the light. And then, but if sin is not the cause of the suffering, either way, when I suffer, I just tend to ask, Lord, did I do something wrong?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
like, is this a discipline? Or is this like, am I reaping what I sowed?
Yeah.
Or is this just part of life and fallen world? I'll ask.
Yeah.
And then, and so it just becomes the beginning point for a conversation with God about what are you doing? Why did you allow this? I don't always get an answer, but what are you teaching in me? So it becomes it's a humbling of myself. And then, not that I always do it, but
Yeah.
when I do, it goes much better.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that.
So whatever our people, like our listeners, whatever you're going through, I would just say, just humble yourself.
Yeah.
And just say, Lord, what are you teaching me? What are you showing me? And just go to him with it. There might be a little bit of like,
Yeah.
anger you need to let out. Do it like the Psalms. Go read Psalm 22 or Psalm 42 or any of these Psalms where there's just anger, sadness, disappointment. You got to let out before the Lord. Just let it out before the Lord. But the main thing is you go to him.
Yeah.
Go to
And
him.
that is the way out or the way through.
Mm-hmm.
There's the people say that there's not necessarily God's not going to give you a way out, but He'll give you a way through.
Mm-hmm.
That is the way through. Is to first humble yourself, because if you're prideful, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you see in Joseph, in all that story, we never see him. We see him get very emotional. He weeps 8 times in the story, but never once does he complain about his suffering.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so,
yeah.
which I do think it's okay to complain, but
Yeah.
I would say complain to God, not against God.
Yeah.
He wants to hear your complaint.
Right.
Go to him and say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or why does it feel like you've forsaken me?
Yeah.
But not like, God, you're terrible for allowing this.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah, for sure. Well, talk to us about forgiveness and the free gift. I guess make the contrast between us and what Jesus did and that sort of thing, and then just kind of wrap it up with praying for us and the listeners and everybody.
For sure. Okay.
Because I think that'd be a good way to close.
Sure. One of the things I said was that trust is earned and forgiveness is free.
Yeah.
Joseph didn't immediately trust his brothers. It's why he had these tests that seem so harsh. He's trying to see, like, can I trust, like, do they have integrity? Do they have love for each other? Do they have love for their father? Like, he gives them all these tests, and they pass the test. That's when he opens his heart. The Bible does say, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. And so guarding our heart means we do have those boundaries. It means we do say, to the passive-aggressive mother-in-law, like, hey, you can't treat me and my wife that way. Like, that's not okay. So we have the direct conversations. We are careful about whom we trust. We trust our hearts to trustworthy people who have shown their trustworthiness through past behavior. Okay, so the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior.
Yeah.
And so that's what we base our trust on. However, I don't base forgiveness on people's behavior. I base forgiveness on nothing else except, well, really, what I base it on is the free forgiveness that I've received.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't forgive me because I was awesome. He forgave me because I did a bunch of not awesome things.
Yeah, for sure.
And out of the goodness of his heart, he chose to forgive me.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is a gift. And if forgiveness becomes something that I have to earn through my behavior, like, hey, you sinned against me, well, you've got to do this, this, and this, and then I'll forgive you. That's not forgiveness. That's restitution.
Yeah.
This is the gospel. It's actually what makes the gospel different from every other world religion. The other world religions are do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. You're actually, they say that God forgives you, but since you're earning it, even if you're earning only 2% of it, you're still earning it.
Yeah.
And the gospel is so different because the gospel is not I earned it. It's Jesus came. He lived a perfect life that I failed
Yeah.
to live, died, paid the penalty for my sin, and rose again. He earned it for me. So forgiveness is a free gift, absolutely undeserved. And forgiveness is not something we should really like. I mean, if we're not unable to forgive, then yes, we should work toward it. But really, forgiveness is a decision.
Yeah.
It's like I
Yeah.
choose to forgive.
Right.
It's not I feel perfect about you right now.
Yeah.
It's I'm choosing to forgive you, which is to say, I desire God's best for you.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
And then usually I act it out by praying God's best for that person.
Yeah. By blessing them.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, cool.
So we'll do more on forgiveness next week. So
Oh, good.
yeah.
Awesome.
But you asked me to pray it out, so I'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Heavenly Father, I just pray for our listeners. I just pray, first of all, actually, we pray, all of us, thanksgiving for the gift of your Son, Jesus, who so freely forgave us, though we did not deserve it, who died for us while we were yet sinners. And so, Lord, we praise you for that. And I pray that you would help us to forgive others in just the same way, so that our families can become more and more functional as we learn how to get along. But also help us not just to walk in forgiveness, but in wisdom, to know how to trust and how much to trust and whom to trust and all these things, how to open our hearts. Give us wisdom and discretion in this process just as well. I pray for the families of all of our listeners, and I just ask in the name of Jesus that you would redeem their family trees. I pray, Father, for fathers and mothers, wives, brothers, children's in-laws, and just entire family trees. I pray for your full redemption, and Lord, for an extra measure of grace, especially to bring those prodigals home. Lord, so I pray for a tangible sign of that blessing this week upon this listener's family tree, a tangible sign of your blessing upon their family tree. Redeem our families. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.